We are back with our amazing panel, Eduardo Rodriguez and Marshall Kosloff, to talk about the latest with regards to our friend Joe Biden. I think it's fair to say Joe Biden has a history of making some eyebrow-raising comments when it comes to discussing race relations, when it comes to talking to African Americans in particular. And we have a new entry into that category this week in an interview with National Association of Black Journalists and National Association of Hispanic Journalists. He sought to compare the Black in the Latino communities, and it did not go that well. Let's take a listen.
Yes, and by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
Marshall, let me just off the top here get your reaction to those comments.
Yeah, I mean, look, the coldest take of the morning is going to be that Joe Biden is not the most eloquent speaker. He's been making gaffes like this for the past 40 plus years. I think people who try to sort of turn this into a broader thing beyond sort of a fun little gaffe is that everyone knows he does this. No one's electing or voting for Joe Biden because they think he's a President Obama in 2008, able to eloquently speak about a variety of topics. But look, I mean, the thing that's frustrating here is the broader point he's making is actually a really valid one, which is that, you know, as part of the legacy of 200 years plus of slavery, Black people are a much more unified community in this country than Hispanics are, right? Like I was seeing this morning, try telling a Puerto Rican that they're Mexican American, or try telling a Cuban American that they're Mexican American, right? These are different issues and they're voting on different things. A South Florida voter in Miami is probably voting our relationship with Cuba, but a Mexican American in Arizona isn't voting the same way. So that's the point that Joe Biden was ineloquently trying to make. But I think the broader point that matters here is that people tried doing this stuff during the primary. You know, Biden has said so many, frankly, just terrible and ineloquent things about the Black community, but Black voters don't care. And moderate suburban voters also trust him on these issues, too. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Well, Eduardo, tossing this question to you, is there, as Marshall says, is there validity to that broader point that Biden's cleanup effort, explained that he was trying to make? And on top of that, should Democrats be concerned that he was so incapable of making that point?
I'm having a hard time trying to decide where to start responding to this issue, because on the one hand, you know, Biden, for those people who really have spent some time understanding that diversity within the Latino community, when he said that, they're likely a Republican Latino, a Democratic Latino, someone who is first generation, someone who's from Cuba, and another relative who maybe is from South America, all in the same house, nodding at what Biden was saying, going, absolutely, I don't agree with a lot of my family over Thanksgiving dinner, but except that the food is great. So the point of his statement was 100% accurate, but the comparisons, the mistakes that Biden makes because he just kind of bull in China shop goes into these issues, that's something that the campaign is going to have to manage throughout. I think the diversity question is that he's addressing is important as he goes across the country, though. As Marshall was saying, you have to know where you are in the United States to present the right message to the Latino voter. If I go to Florida, South Florida, and start and bring with me Dolores Huerta, who's an iconic civil rights leader, the Cuban American community in Florida will not necessarily respond to Dolores Huerta at all, and vice versa as you go to the Southwest. So you have to know your audience. I think that's what Biden was trying to say, and there are better ways to say it. But he's had this problem in other areas, and I'm sure that they're going to try to manage that as best as they can.
Yeah, well, and they have been managing it by just not having him do that much. I mean, honestly, there was another video clip that went around that I'm actually not going to play again this morning, but where he gets asked about taking a cognitive test and he sort of freaks out about it and says, "Are you a junkie?" to the interviewer. But Marshall, it also has echoes of the comments he made to Charlemagne the God, the "you ain't black" comments if you're not backing Joe Biden. Let's take a listen to those as well.
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. Come on. Take a look at the record.
So, and Marshall, I think part of this is that it's true that the Democratic Party has basically assumed that black people are going to vote for him, are always going to vote for him in large numbers, and they don't have to actually do anything real to earn their support. So what you see in comments about, the black community is not diverse, or if you're not with us, then you ain't black, is kind of giving up the game that is in fact how you look at at what is a very diverse group of people. You look at them as a monolith that you can kind of assume are just going to be in your camp no matter what.
Yeah, and I think on two levels. Right, firstly, to Joe Biden, right? I think Joe Biden has this remarkable ability to have this sort of high school varsity athlete boomer energy from the 50s and 60s, and I think people just sort of that's what it's both like hyper toxically masculine, to borrow a term from the left, and also just out of touch, but people sort of know that and expect that with it. I think this would be a problem if these sort of gaffes were coming out of nowhere, but once again, everyone knows Joe Biden does this. Everyone from a black voter in Mississippi to South Carolina to sort of like a white middle class person, but to sort of the broader issue with the Democratic Party and black voters. Like, obviously, the Democratic Party, I think, takes black voters and in certain respects Jewish voters to sort of ethnic cultural groups for granted. But that being said, I think the most interesting fact that comes out of this sort of Trump era, Sagar and I actually talk about this a lot on our podcast, is this idea that Trump is actually doing a little better with African-American men than he was in 2016. So that's crazy, right? Sort of think about it. Like, there have been all these incidences. There have been all these sort of insensitive comments on his end, right? Like, he's the one who said, like, I've got my African-American there, right? But once again, no one cares. That's sort of the broader story. And I think the frustrating point for Republicans is that Democrats have left this vulnerability. And the Trump who we saw in 2015, 2016, the Trump who was like, I'm a builder from Manhattan. I'm going to make this country great again. I'm going to go to Detroit and make it look better. That was a Trump that could do better. Instead, we got a Trump who basically took George W. Bush's tax policies and Mitt Romney's sort of weird fiscal conservatism rhetoric, and then just sort of gave it for no one. So, like, right now, yes, do Democrats take them for granted? But I do think there's probably more for a black person in the Democratic Party than sort of the generic Reagan zombieism version that Trump has presented.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Personally offended by it, but maybe it's true. Marcia, do you actually think that Biden's gaffes on racial issues could chip away at his support in black communities? Is that something that could keep black voters home on Election Day?
No, and I think one of the best quotes I saw about this during the primary was from a black voter in South Carolina, asked about the gaffes, asked about his voting record on issues, with criminal justice back in the 1990s and the crime bill. What the person said was, look, for the past 8 years, Joe Biden backed President Obama. Joe Biden was this, old hand politician who, took a back seat to this younger black guy. And at the end of the day, I think for a lot of black voters, that really means something. I think for a lot of people, they have credibility. And that's what I think all these things sort of come down to, which is that they know that Joe Biden is this boomer uncle. But at the end of the day, they're a boomer uncle who they trust his heart is in the good place. And I think if Republicans want to push back against this, they need to actually not focus on these sort of gaffes, because once again, that's not what black voters actually care about. Republicans should actually listen to black voters instead of sort of doing this sort of, I'm not going to describe it in the worst way, but this sort of attack that makes conservatives feel good about themselves, right? The plantation stuff.
Yeah. Estuardo, let me ask you about something that Marshall brought up, because I'm really interested to get your take. Joe Biden is doing better with almost every group, every demographic group, versus how Hillary Clinton performed in 2016. He's especially doing extra super well with suburban and college-educated white people. He's doing extra super well with seniors, especially white seniors. The two groups where he is not doing particularly well or not improving on Hillary's performance are, to some extent, the black community. But actually, the one that really stands out is the Latino community. And this after Donald Trump has been, obnoxious in his comments, racist in his comments. His policy is really, very, I won't describe it in ugly. I'll just say he's an immigration restrictionist and the build the wall and all that stuff. There was this assumption from Democrats that Latinos would automatically fall into their camp in numbers that they hadn't seen before. There was an assumption that they would become sort of the solid voting bloc that African Americans have in fact been. Why are things trending in the other direction, actually?
Well, for the last 10 years or more, I think there's been a drumbeat out there that very few pollsters listen to, Republican leadership, even Democratic leadership, The Latino community is not a monolith. It's not a voting bloc. There's great diversity within the politics, issues of faith, the conservative versus the liberal, Latino voter. And on top of that, you have a huge demographic of mixed status families. And we have seen Donald Trump really intimidate to a great extent that community by threatening to add the citizenship question to the census, by rolling programs that provide benefits to undocumented communities, and that attack, that constant attack, has also pushed people back into the shadows. So you have a broader community here of Latino voters who are also not participating, no longer having that faith or that energy to get involved civically anymore. And so I think that the Democrats are looking at a community they think will come out to vote for Biden, but they're not able to get them activated. They're not able to get them as energized, and that's going to be a strong battle for them all the way up until Election Day. That to bring these people out, the mixed status families out, as well as appeal to the conservative Latinos who, for the longest time, vote on certain issues like right to abortion issues, a number of faith issues, and leaving church alone. I mean, there's a lot of divide within the Latino community, so it should not have been taken for granted over the decade plus, and cannot be taken for granted now. That's one of the reasons I mentioned Ana Navarro, a conservative, someone who has been out there with the Latino community on that side of the political landscape. And I think she's going to be out there trying to bring some of those Latino voters over to Biden. But it's going to be tough. And consistently making that assumption that we're going to have all the Latino voters is a huge mistake.
Yeah, I think for the future, look, I agree with you guys. I think Biden is well positioned for the fall. I think for the future, Democrats should be deeply concerned at the apathy among young people and among working class Black and brown people. It's so great to have both of you today. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic weekend, guys.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Next on Rising, all eyes are on Tennessee. We're going to tell you about a Trump-backed winner and a totally shocking, out-of-nowhere win by a progressive leftist upstart when Rising continues.